says it's. There we go. All right, welcome, Justine and Genna. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you. So Genna and I are doing this presentation today, which is kind of like a part 2 presentation. I think sometime last spring, I gave a presentation about dyscalculia in the math classroom. I don't remember the exact date. And this training is meant to build off of that one. We're going to be diving a little bit more into talking about math anxiety and then spending a little bit more time on number sense routines. Because after last presentation, people wanted a little bit more information about the number sense routines and how to implement those into their classroom and a little bit more of the teacher talk piece of that. So we'll be talking about that today. Just so you know who we are, I'm Justine Hill. I teach upper level math in the DOC. So GED and high school diploma. I have dyscalculia, so I have some personal experiences to share about what it's like to have the disability, or at least my presentation of the disability. You'll see that it presents really differently from person to person who has it. I was pretty interested in dyscalculia because I have it. So I've taken some graduate courses on best teaching practices for students with dyscalculia. I have a math specialist certification through the University of Wisconsin, a master's in curriculum design, a master's in developmental psychology, part of the A team that helps plan math professional development for ABE educators. And I always have to tell people that I don't use a lot of tech. Working in the DOC, we don't have much tech that we're allowed to use or that I'm comfortable using in my classroom with a lot of the supervision that I would have to do. So I'm not a Zoomer. Be patient with me as I struggle through the technology.
All right. Justine, you do a great job with the technology. And my name is Genna Hart. I am the lead teacher at Diploma Connect, which is a high school, the adult diploma program through Project for Pride in Living. I primarily teach math and science, but I also focus on social studies and the career readiness piece of the adult diploma. I have a master's degree in special ed teaching with a focus on learning disabilities. And I taught as a high school special education teacher for over 10 years. So I've worked with students with all sorts of disabilities, but again, particularly with learning disabilities. And like Justine, I am a member of the numeracy A team to help bring awesome professional development to everybody in the state. All right, so for today, like Justine said, this is a part 2 of a presentation webinar that Justine presented, maybe we think it was last spring. So we're gonna go through and we're gonna define what dyscalculia is, what it looks like in practice, how to identify students' coping mechanisms. We're gonna touch a little bit on shifting mindset and reducing math anxiety. We're going to review some tools to help students. And then Justine's going to spend a good amount of time going through the number sense routines, graphic organizers, and tools in general practice. If anytime you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. We'll keep an eye on the chat as well. So this was a video that Justine presented. It looks like February 5th of maybe last year. And this is a video that we will link at the end of the day today. You will have access to an article with this video that focuses on what dyscalculia can look like, particularly in high school, but also sort of leaning into adult education. There currently isn't a ton of research for dyscalculia in adults, but this is good information to just start looking into what's out there and what might be available to support students. All right, so one of the most commonly used diagnostic criteria is the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorder, which is a mouthful to say. It's now in its 5th edition, and it's published by the American Psychiatric Association. The DSM-5, in the DSM-5, developmental dyscalculia falls under an umbrella term called the specific learning disorders. The definition in the DSM-5 states that a specific learning disorder is a neurodevelopmental disorder of biological origin manifested in learning difficulty and problems in acquiring academic skills markedly below age level and manifested in the early school years, lasting for at least 6 months. It's not attributed to intellectual disabilities, developmental factors, or neurological or motor disorders. So that's kind of a mouthful for what the actual DSM-V definition is. You can go to the next slide, Justine. So it also states it's not actually attributed to an intellectual disability. So it's a marked deficit in one particular area. So looking at the definition, it must specify if it's an impairment with reading, an impairment with written expression, an impairment with mathematics, really with number sense, fact calculation, and mathematical reasoning. So throughout this presentation, we're going to talk about a little bit how it impacts the number sense, the facts, and the calculation, because it really affects students' abilities to retrieve arithmetic facts fluidly, which is a big one. So we love this graphic. We're a little bummed that it's blurry. Both Justine and I have spent a lot of time trying to find this graphic in other areas, so it's a little bit more readable. So apologies that it is blurry, but it's a really nice general overview of things that someone with dyscalculia might struggle with. If you were to look up the symptoms, the list is very extensive, as you can see, because dyscalculia presents differently from person to person. A person with dyscalculia may really struggle with number sense, but do well with data and statistics. Even a student who has dyscalculia, they could find certain areas of math really easy, but some of the main symptoms of dyscalculia typically have to do with number sense or skills learned early in math. So think about things like place value, comparing numbers, greater than, less than, the commutative properties, so the a plus b equals b plus a, those multiplication facts, finding and seeing patterns, countings by twos, threes, fives, or even navigating on a number line. Some other common symptoms of dyscalculia include spatial awareness. So something like that dog is 10 feet away would really be difficult with someone with dyscalculia because they have no concept or understanding of a foot, let alone 10 feet. Even the activities where you guess how many candies are in the jar is something that people with dyscalculia also struggle with. People have trouble telling time or even have trouble keeping track of time or remembering dates. So students with dyscalculia need lots of tools to help with organization. So some statistics here. 5 to 10% of the population may have dyscalculia. It is believed that dyscalculia is grossly underdiagnosed due to a lack of understanding of the disability. Many people with dyscalculia have other cognitive impairments. 20 to 60% of people with dyscalculia have other diagnosed conditions like dyslexia or even dysgraphia, which is the written expression. And there may be a connection between dyscalculia and the inability to read music. So it's a pretty prevalent learning disability, but again, it's massively underdiagnosed, especially in adults. And like we've said, there's just a lack of research in the adult education world focusing on these specific learning disabilities. So a few things, as you're in your classroom and working with your students, how to identify students with dyscalculia or a learning disability. There's oftentimes coping mechanisms that come along with that. So coping is defined as the cognitive and behavioral efforts that are used to manage the demands of stressful situations, as well as the emotions surrounding those situations. So there's 4 types of, there's several more, but there's 4 types of coping mechanisms that we're going to look at today. So the problem-based coping, that's an effort to change the person or environment relation. Emotion-based coping, efforts to regulate the individual stress level, the emotional response. So that's where you may see students getting really fidgety, maybe agitated. You'll see some of those more physical or emotional stressors in their body and on their face. So support seeking, the involvement of other people as resources to seeking solutions to a stressful situation or to listen to and provide understanding for emotions surrounding the stressor. So the support seeking, you may see your students go to other adults for help, usually trying to find a trusted adult to help release some of those emotions. And this next one's a big one that I've seen in my classroom is avoidant coping. On the other hand, it may manifest as a behavior-oriented coping, but it's that avoidance of work, of being in the classroom. Justine said that she's a big avoidant coper. It's a lot of procrastinating going on. And so then on the very far side of the page, there are some really common coping mechanisms that students use that you may or may not see in your classroom. So commonly it's students forgetting supplies and materials. So forgetting their glasses, like, oh, I can't see the board, I can't do my math today. If you use a computer in your program, they might forget their computer. Using the bathroom during instruction or work time, so that avoidant coping mechanism. Again, the skipping classes, just not coming to your math class, but maybe going to their reading classes or other ABE related classes. You'll notice that some students prefer to work alone versus with a group. So that way they don't feel called out in the group for not knowing the assignment or the problems or their math skills. Or vice versa, you might have students that really get excited to work in groups, knowing that their group members will be the ones that carry on a load of the work for them. And with the next one, choosing specific partners who will do the work. So oftentimes students know like, hey, if I partner with this person, they'll be the ones to help me get through this by either doing the work or doing a lot of those leading questions where the student might be able to then fill in where they're able to. And then choosing social events over coursework. So doing something fun versus the homework, which is a very common one. And then physical and emotional stress responses. So that's where you may see the students who are getting really anxious, like physically, you can see it in their bodies. You can see them getting overly stressed. So those are just, again, some typical ones that I've seen in my classroom and that I've experienced, but some that you might also see in your classroom as well. So we're curious, for those of you that are working in classrooms or working with adults currently, what are some examples of student coping mechanisms that you have seen in adults that you work with students if you've taught in other situations before? You can share in the chat or unmute. And Justine said that the physical coping mechanism in high school is that she would throw up every single morning before school because she was so worried about math class. Are there any other coping mechanisms you all have seen before? Or something that you think might be a coping mechanism? Avoidance, going to the bathroom, making a phone call, smoke break, just leave. Yeah, a lot of avoidance. Getting aggravated, yeah. Sitting as far as possible from the front of the room. Yep, exactly. Yeah, those are all, I don't want to say good examples, but they're definitely examples of students trying to cope with whatever might be going on in the math classroom for them, whether it is dyscalculia or a math learning disability, or even what we're going to talk about next, that math anxiety as well. So we're just going to watch a really short video on math anxiety. I know this is something that has been brought up in a lot of professional development. I've seen it more recently than it has been in the past. This video in particular is helpful to be shown to students. So students might be able to recognize that math anxiety and some possible solutions for anxiety support.
Ever said any of these phrases? You might have math anxiety. Math anxiety is a feeling of worry or uneasiness that interferes with the ability to do math. It's been shown to decrease working memory, which is a part of your short-term memory that holds information while solving problems. So, math anxiety doesn't just make you feel nervous, it can actually hurt your math performance. This can make your anxiety worse, creating a loop that's hard to break out of. But the good news is you can break out of the cycle. Here are 5 tips to help. Write about your anxiety. Studies have shown that people who wrote about their frustrations and worries before taking a math test actually performed better. Strengthen your foundation. Math often builds on a set of basic skills like addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Practice a little every day to build your confidence. Show all of your work. Because math anxiety takes away working memory, the more you can write down, the less your brain has to hold. This can also help you check your work once you're finished. Relieve stress. Anxiety can also cause physical symptoms, like shortness of breath and increased heart rate. Combat these physical symptoms by practicing meditation or breathing exercises. Think positive. Math anxiety is mostly built on the worry that you won't be able to do the math. Therefore, self-efficacy, or the belief that you can do something, is a counter effect. Ditch phrases like, "I'm not good at math," and replace them with, "I can do this." Everyone encounters math at some point, so it's important not to let math anxiety hold you back.
GCF Global, creating opportunity.
Ever said,
Again, that's just a very short, quick video about math anxiety. And some of the math anxiety solutions in there are easier said than done, and that, can take practice over and over again for our students. So shifting mindset and reducing math anxiety, that's a big one. I had a lot of math anxiety in school, and even getting into teaching adults. I've really learned to hone in on my math skills, which has then lessened my math anxiety the more and more I teach it. So there are several ways that we as teachers can contribute to math anxiety or help reduce it. The most common way is by using mindfulness techniques in the classroom, so that positive self-talk. Think about having consistent routines, incorporate brain breaks and breathing exercises. And also think about the organization of your space, which isn't always easy if you share a space and don't have your own space. Additionally, using the CCRS shifts and math practices is a great way to set up your lesson in a way that are more focused on what students are learning. So I really like the CCRS shifts and practices as a way as I'm designing my lessons. The shifts, focus, coherence, and rigor to really help set up that base for students, and then think about the levels that they're going to next, so that way I can help prepare them for what they've got up in the future. If you're not familiar with the CCRS shifts and practices, I highly recommend the Atlas trainings on them. There's a couple great ones. The CCRS Foundations and the CCRS Math Cohort are great options. Also, teaching numeracy to adults is a great training to get you more familiar with the shifts and practices. And then again, we'll have all of those links at the end of the webinar for you if you're interested in those. All right, next slide. All right, so wrapping up math anxiety, what are some ways you can support students with math anxiety in your classroom? So we've talked away about some of the ways that you see your students coping with math anxieties or dyscalculia. What are some ways that you can support your students in the classroom? All right, work on some simple breathing with your students. Yep, sometimes as a teacher too, especially if you're experiencing some math anxiety, taking your own deep breath can help. I take a lot of deep breaths with my students as we're facing some of those math problems. Yes, exactly, Megan. Talked about your own math anxiety. Help them to see that it wasn't a student thing, 100%. That makes a big difference and can help students relate. Oh, not using the dreaded red pen to mark answers as incorrect, 100%. I have thrown away all of my red pens, probably from my own anxieties as as a kid. All right. Well, if you have anything else, feel free to pop them into the chat. Oh, that's a good one. Recognizing even the small wins. Every little piece of progress is important. Exactly. All right, so before we move into examples of routines and support, this video is great to see how math anxiety is or isn't connected with students who have dyscalculia. This video was produced just last year and contains a little bit of recent research. So again, there's not a ton out there yet, but it looks like we're getting there. So Justine, if you, yep, perfect,
Fortunately,
thank you.
the amount of research on dyscalculia is still way behind of the research on dyslexia. The genetic research shows that the genes that are associated with reading are often also the same genes that are associated with math. And what do these genes code for? Well, they code for proteins that are involved in brain development, right? So I think we've gone beyond these neat categories to appreciating that there's more continuum and that these things are related to one another. What does it feel like to be a dyscalculic? I think probably young children are not so aware of it, but later on in life, they become aware that, you know, when it comes to very simple calculations, doing your budgets, that they're just really finding that difficult. The other thing that I think they'll increasingly experience is this feeling of falling behind their peers, and that no matter how hard they work, it's very difficult to reach the same level of fluency, of understanding. So math just becomes this thing that ideally they'd like to avoid, right? Because it isn't rewarding. It's something that may even lead to mathematics anxieties. I think also math anxiety has become a big topic of interest. And there, I think research shows that yes, students with dyscalculia are more likely to experience math anxiety, but you are also able to find students who are dyscalculic who have absolutely no math anxiety. So they're not the same thing. And that's important for classroom practice, because a student that is anxious is not necessarily a student that has math learning difficulty. And that's very positive, because then we can go in with other approaches that focus more on their anxiety and how can we remove that anxiety from their learning context. I would say that having a math learning difficulty is not a sentence. It's a recognition of your neurodiversity, but it also means that you need to advocate for yourself, and especially with dyscalculia, because with dyslexia, we have so many resources, right? There's so much great work. There's so many good evidence-based approaches. I'm not saying it's easy being a dyslexic, but you have much more on offer to you. So be an advocate.
All right, thank you, Justine. So a key thing to remember is that not all students who have dyscalculia have math anxiety, and vice versa. Not all students who have math anxiety have a math learning disability. However, many of the supports and modifications that you might use for a student with dyscalculia are also good for students with math anxiety, which ultimately ends up being really great tools for all students. Just everyone's different, and it, learning disabilities and math anxiety shows up differently for all students. So some of it's going to be a little bit of trial and error as you're working with your students to find what support and modifications might be the best fit. Which next we're leading into some supports for our students. So I'm going to hand it over to Justine.
All right. Wait, okay, good. I was like, I added a funny slide, and if it's not there, that's really going to ruin things for me. So right now I'm going to talk about some number sense routines. The bulk of my time today is going to be going through these number sense routines, just because I think that they are so important for not only students with dyscalculia, but for all of our students. I really think that utilizing number sense routines in the math classroom is like an equity thing. We're all approaching math from different math backgrounds, and when our teachers use number sense routines and they use them consistently and effectively, you're making your classroom more equitable. I feel so strongly about that. Initially, when I did this presentation, I was trying to look into if there were specific programs that would help people with dyscalculia. The problem is that all of those programs that exist cost a lot of money, right? And so our programs aren't just going to have money to spend on the computer software that's available for people with dyscalculia. In fact, in my research, I could only find that there were like very select colleges that used computer programs. I couldn't see what they looked like to give an opinion on them or anything like that. And so instead, what I wanted to do was really focus on free or low-cost strategies that people could use in the classroom to assist their students. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about today, you're going to go, duh. And I think that's a good thing. Hopefully it will help you feel more confident that you are already doing a lot for your students, and hopefully it will like reignite a little bit of a fire for doing some of these more fun pieces of the job, because I think number sense routines in particular are super duper fun. So I put my funny slide in here. This wasn't here when we did our tech run through yesterday. But I saw this when I was late night scrolling on my phone as I was feeding a baby. And I was like, well, if this isn't the truth about everything in my life, I am a planner, right? I love planning things. I have like a beautiful lesson plan all the time, but the truth is things don't always go to plan. I think my presentation style is really similar. I plan a lot, but then I just kind of dive in, knowing that depending on the questions people have, the presentation is going to take some turns. So I want to encourage people to ask questions as I'm going through these number sense routines, and kind of let the horse turn into, I don't even know what that looks like, a really overweight dog. That kind of looks like my dog after the winter when he gets less exercise. Let it take that turn. Ooh, a buffalo. Yeah, I could see a buffalo for sure. Let this presentation take that turn a little bit for you, and practice letting like your lessons take that turn too. One of the things that I do in my classroom to try to model for my students as well is, with all of these number sense routines, I don't download the keys. I don't download the answers. I don't go in like overly prepared, like this is exactly how this routine is going to go. I like experiencing it as a student with them. So when they ask me a question and I'm like, I don't know, I got to think about that for a minute. It really helps show them that it's like normal to noodle. Write that down. I like that. It's normal to noodle. It's normal to think about math. It's normal to be stumped by a problem. It's normal to maybe not notice the super numbery, mathy things about something right away when you're looking at it. But we can lead it in that direction, and that's okay. Yes. So this is kind of an example of a warm-up that I do in my classroom. A lot of questions that I get about the number sense routines. Does it have to tie into your daily lesson? No, in fact, it shouldn't. Number sense routines aren't really a time to teach. They're a time to listen. They're not meant to teach a concept or reteach something or review. They're just there to help students build confidence, build some understanding around really basic things with numbers and basic operations. As Genna talked about when she was talking about dyscalculia, you often see it affecting number sense more than other areas of math. So really basic things with math. And I know that's my experience with it too. I don't know my math facts very well at all. And so something like this, where I get an opportunity to interact with numbers in like a really low stakes way, is super good. It gets students thinking immediately when they come into the room. It gets them verbalizing their thinking and having conversations and working collaboratively. Students have fun doing these. They often I only do one, maybe two math puzzles a day. And like I said, this is typically my go-to, are these ones from Mashup Math. I only do one, maybe two of these a day, but my students are like, can you put up another puzzle? Can you put up another puzzle? So they're having fun. And finally, it hits on that equity piece I talked about earlier. It's approachable for all my students. There's access points all over the place. They don't necessarily need to be talking about math. They could be talking about the pictures. They could be talking about how they notice that this puzzle, the theme of it is fruit. I have one where the theme is grilled cheese. So there's cheese and a pan and a spatula and stuff like that, and butter and bread. And my students like to argue if it is actually talking about grilled cheese or not. I really like leaning into that. They don't need to talk about the numbers all the time. Sometimes their other observations can lead into math conversation. So looking at this puzzle, what do people notice? What would you do if you were a student in the classroom and this was up on the board and your teacher said nothing to you about it? Because that is what I do. I put this on the board and I say nothing. Great. So in the chat, somebody is saying that the first reaction is what? But then as they look at it more, they start to notice things like 2 bunches are grapes, and those 2 bunches are the same as 24. That's good. Any other first reactions if you saw this posted in a classroom and you were the student? What would you notice or see right away? Also, if it's easier to unmute, feel free to do that. All right, another participant immediately went to the numbers.
I looked at all the operations happening. So there's multiplication and addition, and several of the problems have like plus and plus in it. So I looked at what my symbols were.
Good, good. Checking out the operations, the symbols. Mark said he eventually saw the question mark. As I worked my way down, I realized I had to revise my thinking. Jenny, do you mind me telling me more about that? What were you thinking initially, and what did you have to change with your thinking? I can tell you when students see this and they realize that it's a math puzzle, a lot of the time they want to start with the very first line. But then it immediately follows up with them. They're like, well, I don't know what the pineapples and the strawberry are. They just do, this is 1 + 1 + 1 is 3. The pineapples are 1 and the strawberry is 3. Yep. So Jenny said, first, each pineapple is worth 1, but that doesn't work if grapes are 12. Exactly. So a lot of our students will jump in if they realize that this is math related, and they're like, okay, it's a puzzle. I can solve this. If it doesn't give me numbers, I'm just going to default to 1, which honestly, I think is a great default. I think a lot of the time when we tell our students to test numbers, especially when they get to the algebra level, we tell them to test with -1, 0, and 1, right? So defaulting to 1, I think, is super natural and normal for us. But then they get the holdup when they get to the lower lines, and they go, okay, 3 × 1 is 3. And then they get to the third line and they go, 3 + 3, is that equal to 24? And they go, no, oh no, what do I have to do? And so then they go, okay, we have to start on the third line. I let them dive in and make that error. Sometimes if they're really new to these puzzles or they've never seen them before, or if it's lower level students, I will number the lines and tell them, your hint today is that you need to start solving this puzzle by starting with line 3, right? So you kind of have to know the level your students are at to figure out what level of struggle is appropriate. The more familiar they become with these routines, the more struggle you can let them have. If it's a really new routine for them, I'd give them an even simpler puzzle than this one, just so they can kind of learn about how to do these puzzles and the problem solving that's involved. But not giving them too many hints is a really good thing. Our students typically are afraid of struggle, right? And it gives them more of that math anxiety. You're really giving your students a gift if you tell them that struggling is okay, if you normalize it, and if you give them the tools that they need to navigate through that struggle. So yeah, the chat is just kind of mirroring letting your students engage in that productive struggle, and figuring out what level of struggle is appropriate for your students. So yeah, once you start going through it, your thinking will change, and you realize you have to start with the third line. Where would you go after the third line? What would your next step be after you figure out that, well, and what are grapes equal to? Did anybody say that? I can't remember. Yep, you said they were 12. Okay, so after we figure out grapes are 12, what line would you try to solve next? Good. In the chat, somebody said the second line. Why would you go to the second line? You know 2 of the 3. It's the least number of unknowns. This is where I try to build up a little bit of math vocabulary with my students, and I start talking to them about what variables are, because all of these pictures of fruit are variables. I say you typically start in the line that has the least number of variables. So line 2, what times 1 is the same as 12? And I think somebody in the chat said, now we know that strawberries are also 12 because 12 times 1 is the same as 12. And I'm kind of talking through this a lot in this presentation because this is exactly what I would say using this in my classroom. This is exactly what my language would sound like. These are the questions I would also ask my students. Effective questioning strategies will help your students learn how to verbalize their thinking. It will help you build their vocabulary around their thinking. It will help you teach them about the word variables, right? So line 2, 12 times 1 is the same thing as 12. So now that we know strawberries, what line can we go to next? Which line only has 1 variable for us to solve after we know what the strawberry is? Good, line 1. If the strawberry is 12, how do we figure out what these pineapples are? And I have to make the assumption that since the pineapples all look the same, they must be the same number. Somebody said 12 divided by 3 is 4. Somebody else said 3 fours. But I'm confused because I see addition symbols in the first line, and now somebody's doing division. Can anybody explain to me why there are plus symbols there, but we're doing division? Ah, yes, because we have 3 equal groups, right? We know that they're equal because the pictures of the pineapple are the same. And so if I want to get one number into several equal groups, I got to divide it. Exactly. Did anybody use a strategy other than division to get to 4 for the pineapples? As math teachers, I got to be honest with you, probably all of us are using division. But if you have students in your classroom, some of them who are at a lower level, this might be a really appropriate time for them to. So I have this on my board projected on like a smart board. And I sometimes say, okay, if you don't know how to do it, if you don't know how to get 12 into 3 equal groups using division, what would you do next? Let's draw a picture, right? And this is an appropriate time to like draw tallies over each of the pineapples and kind of help students through some of those thinking processes. Because as math teachers, we see division right away, but lower level students might not see division and they might not really know how to get those pineapples into those 3 equal groups, right? So drawing pictures or saying, well, use your fingers to figure it out. Those are things I do in my classroom every single day. So I know it might be a little bit laughable as I'm kind of going down this line of questioning right now, but it's just something that I've had to do in my classroom a lot. I'm also seeing Genna talking about how to extend it for higher level. So setting up an equation to figure out what the pineapples are, right? So you can adapt this for the higher end of your students as well, because if they see that they divide right away, setting up an equation and going through that algebraic process to kind of extend this activity is really good as well. I also see Mark saying in the chat, guessing and checking. I can't tell you how many times I tell my students, try a number, see if it works. Okay, is that number too high or too low? How do we adjust, right? They need to kind of learn some of those different skills. And again, be comfortable using them. A lot of our students just want to have the right answer right away. And my goal is to get them to be comfortable trying out different problem solving things and coming up with the wrong answer a few times before they get to the right one. That is going to help them with resilience in your math classroom as well. And that is going to help them realize that kind of doing some problem solving and trying different methods when you're trying to figure out a math problem is really normal, whether it's a really easy problem or a really difficult problem. So then after we do the first line, we jump down to the fourth line. And again, I would reiterate to my students, like, how do you know that I jumped to the fourth line? Why can't I just go to the very last line? And they're all going to be like, Miss Hill, it's because there's one variable to solve still. Or they might just say, because there's only one more to figure out. And I go, one more what? Picture of fruit. Okay, what do we call that picture? What math word did we learn today? And they're going to say variable, right? So using this as an opportunity to build vocabulary, even though it seems super repetitive on the teaching end of it, you are building up those skills. So what plus 4, because we know the pineapple is 4, is the same as 6? Two. 4 plus 2 equals 6. Good. And then finally, we get to do the bottom line. So 12 plus 12 plus 2 is equal to what? Good. It's equal to 26. Good. Making some nice math equations there. And really taking your time to go through this and like ask students to verbalize their thinking is one of my key pieces of advice for the teacher side of things with this. I will admit that sometimes I do these so much that sometimes I get lazy and I just ask the students, all right, write your answers up on the board. I'll tell you if you're right or wrong. But it is most beneficial and most effective if you are using this as an opportunity to like facilitate more of that thinking and problem solving, like I just did. I have a couple more of these. Does anybody want to go through more examples of these to hear the teacher talk side of things, or would you like to see a different number sense routine? Also, there is a question in the chat. What grade level is this considered? That's a good question. Mashup Math has it divided out by grade level. And I don't remember what level this puzzle is considered, but they do typically have 3 levels of puzzle, one really low, one really like middle level, and one kind of higher level. And they have it divvied up into grade level, but I don't remember off the top of my head. I think you could make this work for a variety of age level. I think you could make this work for like a 3rd grade level and above. I think this would be maybe too challenge this puzzle in particular. There are easier puzzles that you can do with the lowest level of math, because I did used to teach our lowest level of math, and the easier puzzles are appropriate for them. This one, I personally would put at like the 3rd grade level or above. And sorry, just to clarify, furthermore, do you want to look at more of this particular type of puzzle or a different type of number sense routine?
I would say let's do a different one. And then if we've got some time, we can always come back and
Okay, cool.
revisit. Because I think we've got 3 or 4 other types of puzzles on deck, maybe.
Oh yeah, I put way too many in this presentation.
Lots of good options.
The good thing is if I don't get to all of them, you guys are going to be sent these slides. Websites with resources are linked on all of the slides as well. And my email is on that first introductory slide as well. So if we do not get to everything and you're looking at the slides and you want to know how it works or you want to know more about the resource, I'm happy to hop on like a 10-minute call and do a quick crash course as well. So never fear, I overplan because of who I am as a person. So next routine that I like using is think, notice, wonder. So again, put yourself in student shoes. And if you walked into a classroom as the student and this was on the board, what would you say? What conversations would you be having? Please chat it out. So some comments in the chat right now. I noticed the patterns. All right, so there are a couple different patterns that you might see here that students might be talking about. They might be talking about how the dice go 2s, then 1s, then 2s again. They might be talking about the number of dice. There's 5 dice, then there's 6 dice, then there's 5 dice again. They might be talking about the color. I don't even know what the first color is. Green, yellow, or white. Looks like all 3 to me. White, purple, then white, right? So there are like several different patterns that they can be talking about, both with numbers and without numbers. So this kind of demonstrates that idea of different levels of accessibility. Even if students are intimidated by numbers, they might notice something with the colors right away. Another comment in the chat is talking about those colors. My first thought looking at the is looking at them and wondering if the colors mean anything specific, and then looking at the numbers on the die. I wrote, just because I like wondering things too, like why is there a different number of dice in each line? Why does it go 5, 6, then 5? Somebody notices that there are 2 ways of interpreting the question. So there's a really ambiguous question at the top of this picture prompt. It says, how many? How many what? How many 2s? How many 1s? How many dice? How many white dice? How many purple dice? it is purposefully ambiguous so that students are able to interpret this photo however they see fit. With think, notice, wonder, there's often not correct or wrong answers. It's just what people are seeing. So yeah, I wonder how many what, and then I start answering for myself. So you can come up, so students or you can come up with a lot of different questions and start answering them. I notice 16 blocks. 5 plus 5 plus 6. Good. So you did that extra work of extending it into some type of equation. If students don't extend it further, you can ask them, could you write an equation to describe what you're saying right now? Ooh, this is one I didn't notice. This is fascinating. Why are the dice in the third row inverted from the same number shown in the first row? I love that observation. Why indeed? And that's exactly what students notice. They notice things I never noticed. So that's a wonderful observation. I mean, it would lead me to ask a lot of questions. I'm like, why do you think that? And your students are going to come up with a lot of crazy ideas. That's great. They should. You want them to be asking lots of questions. I see 10 and 6 and 16 and 26. I really like that. Where, Mark, can you unmute? Where's 16?
16 total dice.
Ah, there you go. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
See, and this just shows right here that I, as the teacher, am noticing very different things than my students. So when a student says something like, and 16, I didn't notice 16 at all. I was struggling to figure out where he came with that number. So if they say a number, tell me more about that. Can you tell me what there's 16 of, right? Because they're making a lot of observations most of the time that I'm super blind to. And then Genna says, this is a great way to start looking at patterns, which students with dyscalculia can struggle with. Yes, students with dyscalculia definitely struggle with patterns. And honestly, making patterns is kind of one of those foot in the door things. And one of those things where you don't have to use numbers at all to have like a number sense routine in your classroom. I think after the first presentation, a lot of participants were interested in number sense routines that didn't involve numbers at all. Those are the easiest ones to do, in my opinion, because you could just take basic classroom supplies like pencils, calculators, paper clips, stuff like that, and ask students to make patterns with those and come up with their own patterns and explain those patterns to people, right? So with pattern recognition, you don't have to include numbers at all, and it's really accessible for students. And being able to see and make sense of patterns really helps students get that foundational piece that they need for later on when numbers do become involved. Oh my, Mark also sees 18, the perimeter in units of dice side lengths. All right, I really like that. I would have never gone that direction. 26 pips, good. So as you can see, there are a lot of different observations that we can make about this and ask questions about. And the key thing to remember with teacher talk for think, notice, wonder routines is when students tell you something, ask them to expand upon that. A simple, tell me more about that, leads to a lot of really good mathy conversations and leads to a lot more wonder. Mark says, I like that there are so many different ways to be right. I super duper agree with you. That's why think, notice, wonder is like such an accessible number sense routine, because you really can't be super wrong. I'll show you what some other think, notice, wonders look like here. Like here's another think, notice, wonder. Dice have numbers on them, but this doesn't have any numbers at all. So there's really no way to be wrong here when you're looking at it. Students can be looking at patterns. They might start counting windows themselves. They might not even count windows and start looking at something with the bricks. And here's another think, notice, wonder. So while this has a lot of accessibility points, a lot of this can be extended as well. And if students do start noticing like numbers that emerge in their patterns when they're looking at these pictures, you can ask them to show the pattern in an equation or something like that too. So it's a really easy entry, but it's also really easy to extend this to some upper level math stuff. And students, when they're doing things like that, they really love to be told like, hey, you just did algebra. They're like, what? No, I didn't. And it's like, no, for real, you did. Like that really helps build kind of that confidence with students. Does anybody have any questions about think, notice, wonder? Yeah, it answers the how will this even help me in the real world question, right? Because I get that a lot. I don't particularly enjoy it, but when they have to do a little bit of the legwork, it's helpful. All right, so we touched on this really briefly. Another thing that you can do a lot of is finding or making patterns in your classroom. So here's an example of finding or making patterns with numbers. So if you do have students who are, mid to upper level, you can do warm-ups like this for a number sense routine. Again, this is just something that I found on Mashup Math, but if you just search making math patterns online, you can get a bunch of Google images for this. But if you have lower level students, or if this is something new that you're doing in your classroom and you want it to be really non-intimidating, I encourage what I said earlier about just finding classroom supplies and having them make their own patterns before you introduce like images where you ask them to find the pattern. Starting with making your own is a lot less intimidating than trying to interpret what somebody else has made, in my opinion. You can also, as far as like the patterns go, you can also use brain teasers from periodicals, magazines. Scrolling through social media is where I get most of my brain teasers that I have my students find patterns with, just like this one. So if you do any type of like doom scrolling, or if silly puzzles pop up on your social media as you're scrolling, I encourage taking a screenshot and using them in the classroom. So something like this one in my classroom, students love this. How many triangles are in this picture? And they start counting and the number just grows and grows and grows. And they like drawing on the picture itself to figure it out. And eventually I extend this activity, again, asking them to figure out some type of equation. I'm like, well, could you figure out how many triangles there are without actually having to count all of them? And they're like, what do you mean? How? And then we explore that. So counting the number of triangles is like one of my more favorite pattern recognition activities to do with students. And to be honest with you, if I'm really hitting pattern recognition with my students, I will sometimes leave this image up on my board for an entire week and like not answer the students' questions about it at all. And I will just like write all of their guesses on like a piece of sticky paper next to the board, and like put tallies behind the guesses too. Like, do you agree with the guesses? Let's see how many. And I'll have students who change their number from day to day because they'll start noticing and recognizing and describing different patterns. And then finally, on the last day, I'll be like, okay, let's talk about where you're getting these numbers from. And so then we start dissecting a little bit what patterns they're seeing and how we could write equations for those patterns and stuff like that. So again, if you really want students to noodle something for a while, feel really comfortable just leaving something up or printing this out and giving it to them and giving them like 3 minutes of a day to look at it and play with it. But yeah, I'm super comfortable leaving a more challenging pattern or puzzle up on the board for multiple days to give students time to think about it, ask questions, talk with each other, collaborate, and things like that. And this is one of the most popular number sense routines that I do, is the finding how many triangles. And something like this. This is the answer if they need to see it a little bit better. Another number sense routine is which one doesn't belong. So again, put on your student hat and chat out, looking at this picture, which one doesn't belong. I shared in the chat what my thought was. I think 36 doesn't belong, because it's the only one that doesn't start with an even number. The reason that's my gut reaction is because as somebody with dyscalculia, I really don't like math facts. I don't want to have to figure out like what number goes into all of these equally, if any at all. So I immediately start looking for a different type of pattern. Mark says 81 doesn't belong because it's the only one that doesn't have any digits that appear in the other numbers. Okay, so you go from 36 to 64, so the 6 repeats. 64 to 49, the 4 repeats. 49 to 81, none of the digits repeat. So that checks out. Both Mark and I are correct. Which one doesn't belong is another one of those that doesn't necessarily have a correct answer or wrong answers. There are some which one doesn't belong puzzles that are pictures rather than numbers. So if you have students who are similar to me and like their heart pitter patters a little bit when some numbers get thrown up on the board and they're asked to notice something about them. You can see on this slide, I linked a few different websites for you to check out later that have some which one doesn't belong routines. But again, a simple Google search for which one doesn't belong, no numbers. You'll get a lot of pictures and students can kind of extrapolate or find their own meaning from pictures without having to look at scary numbers too, which I think is really nice. I find that I have to challenge myself by doing puzzles with numbers on them too, because like I said my teaching style is very much not looking ahead at the puzzles before I show them to students. Because I don't want to be too rehearsed. I want to be really genuine in my observations of the number sense routines as well. So I like using a lot of puzzles in my classroom that don't have numbers just because I'm kind of scared of numbers and I'm kind of scared like sometimes to be vulnerable in front of my students and say like, I don't know if I see like which one doesn't belong here. So if you're kind of like me with that, it's okay to do picture puzzles too, to kind of teach the concept of this as well. Any other observations before I show you another number sense routine? Another one that's really, really popular. Ooh, I'm going back because Jenny had a fun observation there. The sum of the digits. Okay, so 36. 3 plus 6 is 9. 64. 6 plus 4 is 10. 49. 9 plus 4 is 13. 81. 8 plus 1 is 9. So 64. The sum of the digits, that's the only one where the sum is even. Love that. Never would have gone that route. I think that's absolutely fantastic. So I think the 3 different observations right there show us that our students can see a lot of different things, and it leads to some really neat conversations and some really neat, simple math. This is probably the last number sense routine I'm going to talk about today, even though there are a couple others in the slides for people to kind of play with. The reason I want to talk about this one is because it's one where it's kind of puzzly again. There's not quite as many numbers involved. And I think we talk about balanced math a lot in the math world. Like I've seen it at a lot of professional development. So if you haven't done this in your classroom yet, it's super duper fun. Does anybody know what the moon is when they look at this mobile? I'll call it a mobile. All right, we have several people getting 5. Does anybody want to chat out or unmute and explain how they got 5? If anybody's typing, keep typing and feel free to put it in the chat. I'm just going to do a brief explanation of this if you're in the room and wondering how the heck anybody could possibly get 5 here. All right. So Genna said it, so I'm going to read it. The triangles equal 8. Okay, because there's 4 triangles and they have a value of 2 each. The square is 3. So the moon has to be 5 in order to add them together for 8. Right, because we want each side to be equal to each other. If you have a board or like if you teach online and there's a medium that you can use and like draw the numbers directly onto the shapes, that is what I would recommend. I would recommend like writing the equation for all of it and using like draw a silly picture of a moon and then like later replace it with the variable X or Y or whatever to show students that when they're doing these puzzly things, they are doing algebra. Because like I said earlier, that really is a boost to their self-esteem when they realize that when they've done like fun puzzly math, they're doing algebra. They absolutely love having that revelation. So here are some number sense routines that are going to be linked for you that I'm not going to go over today, but you can peruse them and I'm happy to schedule a call to talk about any of them if you have interest of doing them in your classroom. 2 truths and 1 lie. Multiplication table puzzles. A would you rather math. Would you rather math is kind of mathy math. So I would do this more with upper level students rather than lower level students. 3-act tasks. I've linked them for a variety of levels here. So I have some that are really, really low level and some that are higher level. So you can do this with the lowest level students or with students who are doing like algebra type things. And then number sense routines, drills. Often people don't like it when I say that math drills are really good because we have this idea that drill and kill is super bad to do. I think we often undervalue how important repetition is since we love to focus on numeracy in math classes or like real world application. And real world math application is like the ultimate goal in math classes. And it's the most important part about math, in my opinion, as well. But for students with dyscalculia, drill and kill is often like really necessary for recall and retention as well. And repetitive practice is really important because sometimes steps aren't always easy to follow or recall. So practicing the process with many different crutches in place is often super helpful and crucial for students with dyscalculia. And Elizabeth shared in the chat that Moby Max also has math fact fluency. So I will add that to this slide later because I always appreciate kind of being able to add resources to everything. And Genna made the comment that it can also help build confidence in students too. Yes. And Megan says, my corrections learners love drills, even the math anxious. Good. Yeah. See, I kind of like them as well as somebody with dyscalculia. It kind of helps build up those skills that I struggle with most. I'm going to skip over a lot of stuff because it was in a prior presentation, but I wanted to have it in these slides for folks to access just so they know that there are supports other than really solid number sense routines in your classroom. There was one other thing that I wanted to talk about today before opening it up to questions, since people asked about it a lot during my first presentation, and that was step-by-step instructions and explanations. So this is, hello. So this would be under the tools category in my book, and it's something that I make available to all of my students, regardless of whether or not they have a math learning disability or suspected disability. I have step-by-step instructions for all the units that I teach in my classroom. This is a screenshot of what it looks like. I make them on PowerPoint slides and then I print them out to go with students' assignments. I print them out 2 slides per sheet of paper, so they're a little bit smaller. If you have someone who's visually impaired, you could do 1 slide per sheet of paper. 2 slides has always made my students really happy. It gives them a little bit of a cheat sheet to look at. So this is just really basic. It shows it for like a circles assignment for area, circumference, radius, diameter. As you can see, all of the different parts of the circle are labeled, they're described. It shows what the letters are. It shows them what pi means. It has an explanation of what radius squared is, because a lot of the times when we square numbers, students think that you're saying a number times 2 and not a number times itself. So it's written out really clearly for students to see. This is like an overview page. The following pages that I have that go with a student assignment walk through doing the different equations. The instruction pages for this say that I want my students to try this out on their calculator, doing it themselves. Making sure that they get the same numbers as are shown in all of the examples on the right. I keep the picture and the formulas on the left so that students have something to follow along with. And then very important for the step-by-step instructions and explanations if you create a packet to go with your assignments. If students are using a calculator, which I really highly encourage, I love calculators. They're a great tool. They help students think about the problem solving of things rather than having to be like math robots. I really want them to think and not have anxiety about not knowing math facts or anything like that. But if they do need to use their calculator, really clear instructions on how to use the calculator, where the buttons are located, and things like that are what I include in my instruction packets that go along with my assignment packets. Since I teach in corrections, everything is paper pencil. So I have everything printed out, and you can see on the previous slide, it tells them what page their assignment is on, so they can look at these examples as they're doing their assignment to kind of learn about the process of everything a little bit more. And this just kind of helps because, again, as I said, people with dyscalculia often have tricky recall. So like remembering the steps and the order of the steps and what the letters mean and all of that stuff can be really overwhelming. So if they have this little crutch there that shows them the steps for everything and has really nice visuals, that can make a world of difference. So we don't have too much time left, so I just want to open it up to any questions that people might have. Whether you want to unmute or ask in the chat that Genna or I could answer for you.
Justine, I just want to point out that there's a slide, a couple slides back for the tools in general practice. Those general tools listed there have really worked for many students in the classroom. So something as easy as like uncluttered, easy to read worksheets, putting multiple spaces in between problems, fewer assigned problems. Some of those little like smaller things that we think of can really make a big difference in the classroom for our students. So don't forget about some of those general tools and practices as well. And feel free, if you have any questions, pop them in the chat or unmute. Like Justine said, these slides will be available after the webinar today, so you'll have all of the links and everything to this. Oh, Jenny asked, where will we find the links? Perfect. You will receive a follow-up email.
And everything is hyperlinked directly in the slides. So for example, I'll just go back really quick as long as it doesn't make anybody hurt anybody's eyes. But you can see the hyperlinks on the lower left of this slide right here, give you 3 different resources for 3 ACT tasks. The hyperlink for this one is in the upper left. So on each slide, there's direct hyperlinks to each of the types of number sense routines. What we didn't talk about today was the graphic organizers. Those are also hyperlinked. And then the step-by-step instructions, I don't have these hyperlinked because this is just how I do my lesson planning, and this is what the lesson plans in my classroom looked like, or looked. They look like this currently too. I started making these during COVID when the living units were shut down and my students couldn't come to class. And I also got in trouble for trying to go to the living unit to teach my students. But I had to figure out how to teach them via written mail, which is really hard to do in math. So I took several years to develop these. So I don't have anything to hyperlink here because this is just what I've created in my classroom myself as like an example for what step-by-step instructions might look like. But I've found that this really helps students work independently and fly through material. And it kind of works like a flipped classroom. They do a lot of this work back in their cells or in their living units. And then they come to class with a lot of questions, or they can tell you precisely what part of a problem they got stuck on. And so it's a really effective way to flip the classroom without the use of technology at all. I used to be so worried about not being able to use any technology because there are a lot of really cool techie things that you can do with math, and a lot of things that you can do with your students. And I used to get jealous at professional development of all the stuff people had, but I've found like my paper materials are super effective. And so I'm really happy with them.
Yeah. So you'll see in the chat, Patsy dropped the article link from that very first video at the beginning of our presentation. And also, we have a ton of upcoming professional development options. So this document is on the Atlas website. It is updated regularly. I recommend if you're able to bookmark it, I think that's an option. But use this announcements and future PD page to see all of the awesome things that are coming up. Otherwise, I believe that's all we have for you today. So feel free if you have any questions. I'll stay on for a minute. I think Justine will too. Otherwise, thanks for joining us, and we appreciate your time today.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Justine and Genna. This was awesome. So yeah, look for that follow-up email, and you'll have access to all these amazing resources that they shared. Thank you for joining us.